Okay, well, the debate is tonight on the Oliver TV. People talking about it, hyper analyzing over the next few days. Got a couple neat little toys here. There's a couple of different pages on the 538.com website. Talks about different election possibilities and scenarios that you can play with. One thing you have heard about a lot is, maybe heard about a lot of prediction markets. Basically, people placing bets on who's going to win the election, and somehow people decided, yeah, that's going to predict the election. It's a betting pool. It's random chance. It doesn't have any special predictive values, and everyone kind of has these little what if scenarios of what's the way to predict the election. Sometimes it's which candidate people most dress up like that's going to predict the election. Or American League or National League wins the World Series, that predicts who's going to win the election. Weird little things like that. Things that just might have a couple of coincidences here and there, but really don't have any kind of real predictive power. That's kind of where this one comes in here too. What would be the odds a candidate would win the election if one state or another were flipped a certain way? In purple here have the 7 states that are the toss-up states right now. It's their starting forecast. Now, 538's run the numbers a few times. Basically, pretty much tied. Harris is a slight favorite, but that's based on current polls of the states and nationwide. So let's look at a couple different scenarios here. Let's suppose Harris would win Wisconsin. In the scenario, Harris would win the election 81 times out of 100. All else being equal, and she wins Wisconsin. Trump wins Michigan. Everything else being equal, even if Harris takes Wisconsin. Scenario, Trump wins 58 out of 100 times. Wisconsin and Pennsylvania go to Harris, but Michigan goes to Trump. Harris 71 times in that scenario, but split Pennsylvania. That's 81 about 100 times. Now, could Harris still win in these scenarios? Yeah, it's possible, but it's a lot easier in either candidate to win Pennsylvania because it's 19 electoral votes. $71 out of 100 times. Let's flip Florida around. It's agonizingly close, but never quite for the Democrats lately. Harris wins Florida but loses Pennsylvania. 80% chance she wins the election in this scenario. Yeah, just a couple ways it's kind of flipping things around. And what would it take to flip a state? Different scenarios here. Looking at popular vote, this is based on 2020 election results, but suppose you got looking at the famous gender gap. Women more likely to vote for one candidate, men more likely to vote for another. What happens if you flip those numbers around? What does this election look like? Say it's women going for Republicans by 13 points. case, Trump went fairly easily. Always tipping point states. Here would basically go over to so Harris wins the men's vote. Again, wouldn't make a lot of difference. My game might pick up Florida in this scenario. Because all the people over 65, older voters tend to be a little more conservative. At least this generation tends to be a little more conservative. It kind of goes back and forth a little bit. 30 years ago, people over 65 tend to be more Democratic. Now they're more Republican, but that can flip back and forth really easily. Well, in this case, flip that over. Florida, North Carolina, go to Harris in this case. Just flips a couple of states. It's been a big indicator lately. Level of education. Why would level of education make a difference among voters?
You put the educated on people. Educated, if you're educated, not very charismatic. Something not. Then they're charismatic.
Yeah, because some people they don't really dive too deeply into this. Like we talk about independent, undecided voters. Sometimes they'll vote just for famous question back in the 2000 election: which candidate would you rather have a beer with? Or sometimes local elections. I like the way this guy shakes hands. Another reason. Sometimes voting behavior doesn't exactly make sense. Just sometimes it's on impulse and instinct. Now, college level voters are likely to be necessarily more insightful, or they study issues more. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. It just depends. But a lot of it comes down to what's your job. But yeah, flip it around. In this case, suppose they went 24 points Republican. Be a very heavy Republican landslide in that case. Very heavily towards the Democrats. Florida, Iowa, North Carolina go to the Democrats. Funny, lower income voters tend to vote more Democratic. Middle level incomes generally fairly evenly split nationally. Race, African Americans, Asians, Hispanics, they tend to vote Democratic. Things with Hispanic voters depends what kind of Hispanic. Go to South Florida, the Cuban community tends to be very Republican, very strong they see the Republicans being more strongly anti-communist. But to go to, say, portions of South Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, California, Hispanics tend to be very Democratic.
They from different. Are they from different like?
Yeah, different parts
of Europe.
Yeah, in this case, go to different parts of the country. Hispanics, you'll have Hispanics more from one part of Latin America than others. In, say, South Texas, they're more likely to be from some of the Mexican border states. North Texas from some of the states of central Mexico. Also, get a lot of people from Honduras and El Salvador in the Dallas area.
So from the country that you grew up in, they were
Yeah, sometimes it is based on ideas that they come from our own country. German immigrants before the Civil War, they were strongly anti-slavery, very pro-union, pro-civil liberties. So they tend to be against. So they tend to be against secession when the Civil War came to Texas. We had large German population in the Texas Hill Country, and afterward, after the Civil War, very strongly in favor of Reconstruction, identifying with the Republican Party. So even to this day, a lot of voters in the Texas Hill Country, German voters in the Texas Hill Country, very strongly Republican. Because the Civil Rights Act, African Americans who basically been many of them been kind of politically homeless since the 1920s, became very strongly Democratic. Immigrants, they have traditionally been Democratic voters since the early 1800s.
Do they matter which country they come from?
Generally does. Sometimes it does matter what country they come from. There again, like you see here, there are exceptions to every rule here. Sometimes, yes, it does. What country they come from does affect that. Like, for example, the Cuban exile community in Florida tend to be very Republican, but generally, immigrants tend to be very Democratic. Because, well, for several reasons. Sometimes they come from Europe, and a lot of European countries tend to be more liberal than the United States. Sometimes, and just because the Democratic policies towards immigrants have always been more lenient than Republicans or any of the Democrats' opponents. And there are a lot of immigrants who are leaders in the Democratic Party. Now, that's immigrants who just arrived, just became citizens. After a couple of generations, those populations seem to become more homogeneous, more like the rest of the population. We're seeing indications that may be happening with the Hispanic population after a couple of generations, kind of looking more like the rest of the population. But again, political science, it comes down to the numbers. What are the numbers going to be? Where are they going to get? Where are you going to get your votes from? Okay. Okay. This is how Pennsylvania voted in 2020. It went to Biden by a couple 100,000 votes. They can see generally where their votes were. Philadelphia and the Philadelphia suburbs, and out here Pittsburgh. This is Erie County up here. Actually, Pennsylvania once famously described as Philadelphia and Pittsburgh with Alabama in between. Across central Pennsylvania. I once went to Gettysburg. I saw more Confederate flags in southern Pennsylvania than I ever did growing up in Dallas.
How is different from?
It's very different from the rest of Texas. It's every city in Texas has its own kind of personality.
Like politically.
Yeah. Dallas used to be very Republican. It's become very Democratic. Austin's always been very Democratic, always very liberal because of the university there. The city kind of goes to the beat of a different drummer. San Antonio always had that heavy Hispanic influence. Dallas and Houston are always kind of rivals with each other, but they have very different feels. So, the elections basically didn't come down to Pennsylvania. So they have to go where their votes are. And you got to understand these are very rural areas. A lot of areas where there aren't a lot of people there. Harrisburg there, the state capital, a couple of counties in here. But these kind of maps are maybe kind of misleading at your first glance, especially if you don't know where anything is in Pennsylvania. But while Republicans tend to have the land area, rural communities tend to vote very strongly Republican, at least they do now. But aren't a lot of people here, aren't a lot of votes here. So you can win Philadelphia here, and the suburban counties. You can win Pittsburgh and surrounding suburbs, and win Pennsylvania fairly comfortably. But again, that's got to go where your votes are. Sometimes, yeah, there are a couple of counties in here that'll sneak in. You have a lot of voters where you didn't expect them. One political scientist pointed out that up here in this area, northeastern Pennsylvania, called the Lehigh Valley, that area seems to be kind of a real battleground. Some areas that could go strongly Democratic, some areas that go strongly Republican. But they can flip a trend one way or another to go decide the entire state. But again, that's Pennsylvania. So if you're running in Pennsylvania, you go where your votes are. You're not. Biden got 82% of the vote in Philadelphia in 2020. Trump about 15%. So he's not going to get a lot of votes out of Philadelphia. But he is going to get a lot of votes out here. So yeah, he does need to pick up what votes he can here, but he needs to spend most of his time and effort out here. Some of the Democrats need to spend most of their time here and here. Especially kind of up here in the Lehigh Valley. That's kind of how it works. Go where your votes are. I'll give you another state here. New York TV station here. New York. Politics in New York, and very different from Arkansas, but it's always been dominated by this factor. New York City, the bulk of the population. And so the majority of the bulk of it. And so Democrats who've largely always controlled New York City, they have to do to win is win real big up here in New York City and kind of break even here upstate. While Republicans to win, and they have won before, their strength is up here upstate. Run their vote totals here and then get close to breaking even in the city, in the Long Island. Now, what you have here with New York is, yeah, it's the city here. You got the suburbs, Long Island, Westchester County, this area here. Areas up and down the Hudson River. And you got Buffalo out over here. It's probably been a fairly Democratic stronghold. But the Republicans are losing the little counties here in between. They're not going to win New York. They're struggling in Buffalo. They aren't going to win. It's the way votes go now in that area. So New York. You got Brooklyn, which goes, the Bronx, which went like 85% Democratic last time. Republicans aren't getting a lot of votes out of the Bronx. But they could get a lot of votes out of Staten Island. They could get a lot of votes out of Long Island. And the Adirondacks here, the Finger Lakes area. They could get lucky and even went all the suburbs and around Buffalo. But you go where your votes are. Someone that's voted Democratic all their life, or someone's voted Republican all their life, odds are they are not going to turn around and vote for the other party. Their voting behavior is pretty much locked in. It has to take something very unusual for them to change that behavior. Now, every election you'll see this. Republicans jumping over to Democrats, and Democrats jumping over to Republicans. Just thinking, while it may get a lot of news, generally it's not more than about 5% either way. Generally not more than 5%. There's some reason, people in one party just don't like that one candidate and they switch parties just for that one election. It happens. But if you get a whole bunch of people more than that, then you've got something very unusual going on, especially a lot of very prominent people saying they're jumping over. Say, for example, Dick Cheney, the former Republican vice president, 2 terms under George W. Bush. That man is a Republican as they come. He was a congressman from Wyoming for a bunch of years. Except they aren't voting for liberals in Wyoming. He was chief of staff to President Gerald Ford, a Republican. He was Secretary of Defense under George Bush Sr. The term these calls Rock Ripped Republican. And he says he's not voting for the Republican candidate, something's wrong. That should be an easy vote. But is that something unusual? Will it make a difference? I don't know. It's coming down to think all this here. A lot of this so far is just guesswork. A lot of this is on what do we know already? As voters, generally, they're fairly predictive. At 80% of your vote, you already have pretty much locked in. You know pretty much how 80% of people are going to vote. But it's that last 20% we're not sure about. Who are they going to vote for? Are they going to jump from one party to another, switch from one back and forth? Are they going to vote for a third party? Or are they just not going to show up? We just got to go with what the numbers tell you. And that's why you see only political ads in certain areas. You talk to people in Pennsylvania and Michigan, they say all they see are political ads and they're sick of them. Here, we don't see any.
I went to Michigan recently. A bunch of ads.
Like I say, and sometimes because we're kind of in a funny media area, we're right on the Louisiana state line. We'll get a lot of Louisiana political ads too. It's kind of weird to kind of watching those, see how it works in another state. But they're going where the votes are. Everyone knows how Arkansas is going to vote. They're not sure how Wisconsin and Michigan are going to vote. A lot of persuadable people still up there. And the national presidential election comes down to the states. So they're going where the votes are, going where they historically have voted certain ways. So they're doing targeted mailings, not just mailing out to everybody. They're mailing to very specific voters. People always vote in the Republican primary. Democrats know, don't bother sending anything to them. They're not going to vote for you. Probably not. Same thing with Republicans. They're not really going to bother sending anything to Democratic primary voters because they know pretty much how they're going to vote anyway. So know where you vote and also try to convince you to vote. example, you just click on certain little ads or visit certain little websites. Just because of that, all these AI algorithms in your computer and on these websites, they'll start targeting you with very specific ads. Yeah, sometimes they'll make the comment, and so it's like the TV hears you, and suddenly you mention something, and suddenly all these ads are popping up on one thing you talked about. They're going based on your clicking behavior. They're looking at your internet, your search patterns, plus your psychology. What's most likely to work with you. While it's not always 100% guaranteed, they can get pretty close. So that's where the election stands. It's our latest little election toy. So, back to the Constitution. The preamble, Article 1, Congress, legislative branch. I talked about how bills are proposed and approved. They're proposed by a member of Congress. They go to a committee for discussion. Then they get placed on the calendar and come up for a vote. Well, suppose Speaker of the House doesn't want to bring a particular bill for a vote. That is his prerogative. They can have what they call a discharge petition. They can get a majority of members to go around and sign this petition saying, I will vote for this bill. It's very unusual, doesn't work very often because it's hard to get 218 people to sign on a discharge petition. And usually, if a speaker sees how the wind's blowing, they'll kind of decide, okay, we'll put it on the calendar. But there are certain little legal parliamentary tricks they have. Because remember, both houses of Congress, they have their own set of rule books. And if you know how the rule books work, you can win the game. Like how one person once described Congress and how Congress works. And there are no referees, they're just other players. Section 8 of Article 1. This is the big one. The main responsibilities of Congress. Congress shall have the power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises, to pay the debts and provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States. But all duties, imposts, and excises shall be uniform throughout the United States. Levy taxes. That includes import duties and so forth. But again, part of this is there isn't one part of the United States that has to pay more taxes than the other. General fees you have to pay the same in Arkansas as they are in Oregon or Connecticut.
I mean, you could say based on.
Sure. Yeah, and it's a good point I'm about to get to. It's a good little segue here. Now, the rich do tend to pay more taxes, but the tax rates are the same across the entire country. This was one of the objections they had to the income tax before it came into effect in 1913, was because there are some areas that have more money than the United States, certain congressional districts that have more money than others. They said that would be unfairly apportioning more money from one area than another. Taxes be uneven. For example, the 3rd District of Texas. That is North Dallas, Plano, Richardson, very wealthy suburbs of Dallas. federal government's going to collect a lot of money for the income tax out of the 3rd District of Texas. But you come here to the 4th District of Arkansas, South Arkansas, and the Delta. Poverty rates in the country. The federal government's not going to collect very much out of here. Much more out of the 3rd District of Texas than it will of the 4th District of Arkansas. So that was the argument against it. So that's one thing that the 16th Amendment corrected, which said the federal government can levy an income tax. They can borrow money. And yes, they are borrowing billions of dollars each day just to pay our bills. Some other times they're just borrowing money to pay the interest on the money we already borrowed. The other thing about the national debt is most of the money is what we owe to ourselves, to American banks, but also we're borrowing from trust funds like the Medicare and Social Security trust funds and so forth. Basically, just put in a bunch of IOUs and just took the money and spent on whatever Congress thought they needed, defense, highways, girlfriends, whatever. Did I say that? Okay.
Say what?
Regulate commerce. Particularly interstate commerce. Federal government can regulate laws for goods traveling across state lines. But for things within state lines, say just within state lines, which was very common at this time period, 1788, 1800, they generally didn't. But because we have a more global economy now, things rarely stay just within a state. An exception may be your local farmer's market. See on the side of the road, Bradley County Bradley County tomatoes and your Hope watermelons, those generally are going to stay within the state of Arkansas. But the Coca-Cola bottling plant in Camden, that isn't just within the state of Arkansas. They're bringing in products and goods and ingredients from all over the world. So because it's crossing state lines, Congress said, we get to make the rules on that. And that was one of the things that Congress pushed to end segregation. Freedom of people to travel across, and goods to travel across state lines, that was a federal matter. Across the state line, it's federal. Just like we'll go to a criminal issue. Suppose someone steals a car here in Arkansas. That's a state crime. But the minute it crosses the state line into Louisiana, the minute it crosses the state line road, that becomes a federal crime because it crossed state lines. Interstate commerce. Regulate commerce with foreign nations among the several states and with the Indian tribes. Now, initially in the Constitution, the tribes were treated as foreign nations. They didn't receive citizenship until 1924. That was uniform rule of naturalization. Basically, how do people become citizens? Now, the president simply does not declare someone a citizen. There's a process you go through as an immigrant. And sometimes a very complicated process. Cannot be declared a citizen. You have to go through the naturalization process. The federal government has to prove it. You have to take a test, and then you're sworn in.
What are they?
Rules of naturalization, who becomes a citizen. Now, there's one rule of naturalization that is firm in the Constitution, the 14th Amendment, which is you're born on American soil, you're a citizen, no matter what else. No matter the status of your parents or anything else, you are a citizen just because you are either the child of a citizen or born on American soil. Something that belongs to you, no one else. Doesn't matter what the status of your parents is. Also, the subject of bankruptcies throughout the United States. So you may go down here and see at the federal courthouse some mornings, a whole bunch of people standing outside. Sometimes that is because, well, they've been called into a federal grand jury, but also because they're filing for bankruptcy. That's a federal matter. Because all those debts, all those credit card companies and banks and mortgages, those cross state lines. Coin money, to regulate the value thereof. Fix the standard of weights and measures. The weights and measures, that's actually a serious thing because you're selling somebody something by the pound, you got to make sure that, that scale actually works right. Like say if you go to a gas station, maybe there's those stickers on the gas pumps or stickers on the scales at Walmart saying tested by the state of Arkansas or state of Louisiana, whatever. That's to make sure that they're not ripping you off. There's a lot of people who have. Provide for punishment of counterfeiting the securities and current coin of the United States. That's a serious matter. There's some very sophisticated counterfeiting operations. This was a very serious issue early in the history of the United States because suppose you're living in, say, Texas, and you get a $10 certificate from the First National Bank of New Hampshire. How do you know it's from the First National Bank of New Hampshire? You don't. So there was a lot of problems, people forging names, forging land title deeds, counterfeiting money. So that's a serious issue. That's one thing, actually, the Secret Service does. Their jobs are protect the president and go after counterfeiters. But here's the funny thing about counterfeiting is I used to be a bank teller years and years ago. And we had a bunch of clients who were restaurants. They did a ton of money in cash. We get those weekend deposits in, hundreds and thousands of dollars in cash. You're counting through it as fast as you can. It still smells like the grill of the restaurant across the street. But every now and then you come across one that's, wait, this doesn't look right. You run that little counterfeit detector pin on it and said, no, it's not right. A lot of times, we get counterfeit money in. Sometimes it was just a photocopied piece of paper. Sometimes it really was. Yeah.
Do you arrest the person who gave it to you, or do you try to find the person who originally gave it?
Good question.
Because if I had something like a counterfeit money and I didn't know it, and I gave it to the bank, would I be arrested?
Yeah.
I would be arrested.
Well, let's put it this way. You hand over a counterfeit bill and say, I didn't know it was counterfeit. Would you believe you?
No. I could probably track down.
Yeah, same thing about law about possession of stolen property. Yeah, you just happen to come across this thing. The mink coat for your girlfriend or the brand new TV set just happened to fall off the back of a truck and you found it, finders keepers. No, it doesn't work like that. But our process was, we'd alert our manager, we'd then call our client, say, yeah, somebody got you, counterfeit, and then we call the FBI. And then the FBI would come in and investigate it. They'd look at this dollar bill, they'd dust it for fingerprints. Sometimes, this is the 1990s, so some of them would, some of these places would have cameras inside, some wouldn't, but a lot of times they wouldn't be able to catch them. Sometimes they might have a waitress who might remember, I remember these people who came in. Might be able to describe them, but sometimes, especially in the old days, they're able to kind of sneak through. So we're able to get them. The thing, a lot of counterfeiting, though, it's very badly done. Establish post offices and post roads. Yeah, the post office, that is a part of the federal government. It used to be a cabinet level decision. Postmaster General. Because they believe that the free exchange of information is the most important part of a functioning free government. So to do that, people got to be able to communicate with each other. That was by letter. Congress has to be able to communicate with their constituents by letter. Assembly constituents need to tell Congress what they think of them. And also, it's an extremely important avenue of commerce. People order things by catalog, it's delivered by the mail. So even before there was Amazon, as catalog places did a lot of good business.
Still on the counterfeit thing. Could I go to the bank and ask if I can give them money and ask if it's
You can ask them. What happened though is if it's counterfeit, they may say, "Sir, we need to contact the FBI about this." But you know, they may see this at Walmart. Sometimes they'll kind of have this pen, they'll mark on something, a little yellow pen. Because of the chemical composition of the ink and the paper, it stays yellow if it's real. But if it's counterfeit, it'll turn black. But could you ask that? Said somebody, you could say, if you go to the bank, say, "Is this real or not?" And you can get those counterfeit detection pins even at an office supply store. But yeah, they'll check it for you. They'll run that little marker on it. But you may want to be very sure they know, where did you get that from? Not, I made it at home to see if it could pass. Don't do that. Some guy gave this to me, and I'm not sure if it's real or not. Because unfortunately for those businesses that got counterfeited, they were that was money they just weren't able to deposit. They lost that money. Yeah, post office. Every town has a post office. Every incorporated community. And this was important because it meant that people could communicate with each other. Also gave their towns their identity. Some cities could not get a post office until they actually named themselves. Gotta say what post office it is. Didn't have the zip codes until the 1960s. Because the post office for in Bowdoin, Arkansas. Promote the progress of science and useful arts by securing for limited time to authors those write their respective discoveries, patents, and copyrights. Laws dealing with that. Yeah. You can make money off your inventions or your artistic creations or whatever. Constitute tribunals and fear the Supreme Court to define and punish piracies and felonies committed on the high seas and offenses against laws and nations. Declare war. Only Congress has the power to declare war. And that seems to me kind of like a formality today. Last time we declared war in the United States, World War II. But the declaration of war, telling some country you've gone to war with them, that is kind of old-fashioned. But what they do today is they have a use of force resolution in Congress. Congress gives the president permission to engage in combat with another nation. Raise and support armies, but no appropriation of money for that use shall be longer than a term of 2 years. Basically, Congress is responsible for raising armies, not presidents. Congress, because they control the purse strings. They say how much money everybody gets. Provide and maintain a navy. Make rules for government regulation of the land and naval forces. Provide for calling forth the militia to execute laws of the Union. Finally, the last one here, it's called the elastic clause. To make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers, and all powers vested by the Constitution and the government of the United States and the department officers thereof. Basically, the Constitution says we give Congress the power to do all these things. recognizing that, yes, its powers may need to expand over time or contract over time, depending on the needs of the country. Because they're recognizing they need to make the Constitution as responsive as possible. Because one thing you notice here in the Constitution, is there any provision for the United States government to create an Air Force? No. There's nothing in here about the Air Force. Does that mean the Air Force is unconstitutional? No. Provisions in here saying, make the laws necessary for the common defense of the people. And that meant modern technology, a modern Air Force.
Well, I mean, the Air Force itself is one.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, as they first started developing aircrafts, the Navy had its own Air Department, the Army had its own Air Department, the Army Air Force, they called it, and they split it off to make it more convenient.
I mean, we still have aviation, but.
Yeah. Best things they couldn't imagine. Is there anything in the Constitution that says the United States government should create nuclear weapons? No. They didn't know what those were. They barely knew what the atom, and I had any idea what the atom was. But they needed to be able to adapt to the times. But also on the flip side of that, that mean the government can't feed starving kids? Nothing in there says it can. But there's nothing in there says it can't. Because that's the flip side of this is people read the Constitution a certain way is some people say, yes, the government has the power to have this huge military. The government has the power to create the most powerful weapons. The government has the power to wipe out all life on Earth with the push of a button. But the government does not have the power to feed a hungry child. That doesn't make sense. They have the power to wipe out all life. They have the power to wipe out Western civilization with nuclear weapons, but we don't have the power to make sure some kid goes to the doctor. We don't have the power to make sure some little kid in Mississippi isn't going hungry. That doesn't make sense. That we have the power to destroy, but not the power to save. That's why it goes back to that one little word here at the beginning of Section 8. The power to provide for the common defense and the general welfare, the general well-being. The power of the government is not just simply the power to destroy. The government does have the power to protect, and defend, and promote, and help people. Because we can't say all the government has the power to do is kill. The government doesn't have the power to save. Again, that just doesn't make sense. Now, these weren't big issues when the Constitution was being made, but they recognized there could be some unnamed scenario in the future where the government has to react. In 1787, the French government was on the brink of bankruptcy. The people were starving. The government wouldn't do anything to respond to it. So the people were ready for revolution. Because the Founding Fathers recognized what's happening in their world before then and what happen in the future is people, if the government does not defend the people, the government does not help the people in time of need, people find a government that will. And that's part of this government is you have to respond to the needs of the people. Now you can have legitimate policy disagreements on how this should best take shape. But the government does have the responsibility to help people in need. The government does have a responsibility to respond to the needs of the people. Whether that is responding to an attack from abroad, or responding to a disease within, responding to a serious social need. The government has to be able to respond to the needs of the people. Okay, so that's it for now. Let's keep reviewing the Constitution. That debate tonight, I know something I heard about, I don't know what it is, but we'll see y'all on Thursday.